pleased to hear. Really excited to be kicking off this session, and I'd like to introduce our amazing panelists in no particular order. Let's go with Mike first.
Hi, it's great to be on, guys. Good to be contributing. Just my background a little bit. I played for 20 years, but I played the other code, which was rugby league. So played in the north of England for 20 years at rugby league. Coached rugby league at the end of that 20 years for 3 years, and then crossed over course to first of all coach Ireland Rugby Union as a defence coach, and I've been coaching rugby union for the last 20 years. So the experiences I have both playing and coaching covers both codes. It was interesting to hear the last panel on, very interesting on the way rugby developed and the history of rugby. And certainly in the north of England, I'm very much in the right area for that history. So great to be on and looking forward to contributing.
Thank you, Mike. Farah, do you want to go next?
Hi everyone, my name is Farah Douglas. I've been coaching and playing for probably about 26 years. I'm a front row player for the US from 03 to 2011. After that, I was an assistant coach with the team in 2014 for a World Cup, and then swapped over to running our US U18 growth program. And I'm currently finishing up my 5th year coaching a Division I NCAA program here in Maryland at Mount St. Mary's. And that's kind of like abbreviated.
Okay, thank you. Olivier, do you want to go next?
Yes, with pleasure. Very happy to be here with you. So I was player in my town home in Grenoble in France from long time. After I was quickly a coach, and I coached several clubs in several countries. So in France, I was at the beginning manager of young academies of Grenoble first, and after of Brive when we was a European champion. And after I coached professional clubs of Rumilly in the east of France, Aix-en-Provence, Massy, Toyota in Japan was a wonderful experience. The national team of Romania for the qualification of the World Cup in New Zealand. And today I'm very happy to be the coach of Switzerland.
Thank you for that. And Nic, do you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Nic Evans. I had a long playing career at Wasps and a couple of caps at Wales where I was distinctly average. And I've moved into coaching and teaching coaching. So I currently teach on an undergrad program in physical education and sport. And I also teach on a rugby applied practice on a master's in performance coaching. And more recently, quite embarrassingly, I was in a documentary that's on Amazon Prime called Steelers, where I was the director of rugby of a men's gay club, very large club.
Thank you for that. And I'm obviously saving the best for last here, our Scottish representative. Not that I'm biased or anything like that. Neil.
Thanks for that, Christine. Appreciate that. Listen, guys, the first thing I'd like to do here is say thanks for being involved. It really is a privilege to be here today. I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land from where I come today, guys, and join you. It's the Paramount people, and I'd like to pay respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. It's a real honour to be here. Look, my background, I guess I'm a little bit like you, Nic, in that I was a bang average player, and then I took off from Scotland to Australia in 2010. I fell into coaching, and for some reason my career took off. I think I can probably put it down to relationships and some of the relationships I built along the way that opened some doors, and fortunate enough to fall into the professional game in Australia and then into the pro game in England with Jersey Reds in the championship. I'm now back in Australia since October 2020 because of the pandemic, and I'm working in coach education and development for Rugby Australia and Rugby Union South Australia.
Hey, thanks very much. Now that the introductions are complete, let's get started with talking a little bit about coaching and performance. So the first question, anyone can jump in with this. What do you think the current status of rugby coaching is in your organisation or your country? Any takers?
Yeah, look, I'm happy to jump in here, Christine. I'll get us going. Look, from a Rugby Australia perspective, and certainly the organisation down here in South Australia, it is the #1 priority for rugby in this country at the moment to increase the standard and quality of coaching. And that's because of the study that was done here that, listen, the results just pointed towards enjoyment in the game and bringing people into the game. And that lay with the environment that coaches created for young players in particular.
Okay. Anyone else?
I'm happy to discuss my experience of the RFU are trying to make significant changes in terms of encouraging more females into the game. And we've seen that in a growth in their program. When I did my level 3 a few years ago, I was the only female amongst 40 elite pathway male players, and every coach educator on the course was a male. And so there's been significant changes here in the RFU. And what I'd love to see is my home national governing body, the WRU, really do the same to support females. But what we now need to do is move on from coach education to actually getting them the jobs, and actually the deployment part has got to follow on from the coach education part.
Okay. Mike, you were going to come in there?
I can only comment on the level that I've been coaching at, and over the 20 years of actually coaching, the level of coaching, the standard of coaching I think has gone through the roof, and the reason why that is the ability to share with other sports. Rugby has got this reputation of being in front of sorry, that's my dogs, being in front of other sports in terms of coaching, but we've got the humility to actually think about that not being true, and actually going trying to educate ourselves to be better coaches. And you know, I last coached in June for Leicester Tigers, and it's now 3 or 4 months later, and I already feel that I'm behind on the coaching curve. It's moving so quickly, the standard of coaching and what's innovative and what's new, that you know, you've got to really keep pushing yourself to keep up with the time. So the coaching at this level, in the Premiership in particular, which I'm very I know what's happening there, is very good.
Okay. Olivier?
Yeah, so if I try to do a small analysis on the French rugby, we can say that we have several points. First, like for Nic, we have a real evolution of the female rugby, and the union, French union, makes a lot of development on this side, and on the 7 rugby. It's really changed, because from long time in France, 7 rugby was not at the top, and the professional league and the LNR and the French Union tried to find a good relation, and it's complicated in France to have good relation between union and the professional league to try to develop 7 tournaments and really change the evolution of the image of the sport and the quality of the sport. In relation of that, we have a very good championship with top 14. So we have a lot of foreigner coaches coming in our championship, like Mike. And like this, we could have a really development of what it's possible to do, what the different culture could give. And I was 5 years, during 5 years at the academy, what we call IFE in France, is the academy for the professional coach to try to continue to develop their skill. And we see that all the foreigner coach was interested by the exchange and really the idea that we could have better rugby if we really try to do something together and maybe to find new skill, not only on the technical side, but a lot on the management side, because rugby totally changed for a coach. 10 years ago in France, you have only 2 coaches. You have one for the backs, one for the forwards, a physical coach and staff, medical staff. Today, you have to manage 25 people who are in relation with you to do the best and to do the clean. So this totally changed the situation. And maybe the last point is the academy of the professional clubs works very well. So we have very good young generations. And today we have a nice team in France at the top level, because we was a world champion on under 20 years old during 2 times, and the last time is final. So we think really is the quality of this development we make the quality of the national team today.
And France have a tradition of developing young players, not just in rugby, but in football as well, in judo, in a lot of sports.
Yes.
Yes.
Sure.
Farah, are you wanting to come in on this? I can't actually see you, so.
I think if you had asked me maybe 2 years ago how I would describe kind of coaching in the US, I would say it's a bit schizophrenic, which I think is probably a bit related to how we're spread out geographically. It's really easy to be isolated and operate in a silo when you're coaching. But as on the women's side of the game, you're having development of NCAA programs, and with the advent of the MLR and their success, you're seeing a bigger push from the top down to create a more coherent pathway for development for coaches, for both grassroots and then elite level, because now there are opportunities to shadow and also look at talent ID, like what's happening, how are these high level programs looking at skill development, game understanding, and I think that is upscaling the coach education that we have. And so I think we're, along with the growth of the game among players and as the game itself is kind of developing, becoming more dynamic, I think coaching in the US is also following that trajectory. And we're also seeing a bigger push, like Nic mentioned, to bring in more women and also some visible diversity around like DE&I initiatives. And so I also think that with the MLR, you're also opening up opportunities for coaches to come in, whether it's volunteering, but that's opening doorways for there to be more coaching opportunities for those coaches that are being developed with the growth of the collegiate game for both men and women. So it's growing exponentially, and with that, it's requiring our coach education to step it up. Yeah.
So we've heard quite a wee bit of talk there about coaching at various ages and stages. We've talked about actually how coaching is becoming more and more innovative and having to keep up to date. But how does actual coaching and coaches, how do they influence performance? Because that's one of the other things that we're talking about. Is this something that you can maybe have more influence at a younger age group, or is it something that happens like Olivier mentioned there with a team of coaches working with more experienced or elite players?
I'll come in there. I think, you know, I think, yeah, to answer your question, coaches can have a more of an influence everywhere, from the junior player to the academy player to the young first team player to the international, both as an individual, one-on-one coach, whether it be a specialist coach like a kicker, or a team of coaches where they are developing the player from a team perspective, getting used to the systems and making good decisions. We heard about Chris Patterson about You know, a good footballer is in his eyes the one that make good decisions. Now, you know, that's an easy thing to say as a coach. Is actually going on the training field and in the classroom. Is how do you actually coach a person or a player to make them good decisions on the field? You know, when you know the pressure's high and your heart rate's about 120 and you've got somebody tackling you from the front and you haven't got much time to make these decisions. So it's a case of, as a coach, is pushing yourself to how can you educate and make the training specific so that the player can get better, whatever that is, and whatever level the player is at that time, whether it's a junior player, I could just mention, whether it's an individual coach or a team thing, you've got to figure out as a coach how to keep progressing that development and evolution of the player.
Okay.
Mike, I think you're spot on there, and something I'd like to add to that is I think the influence of a coach changes depending on who you're coaching as well. So the way you influence a 13-year-old is obviously very different to how you work with a professional athlete, and not only from what you're coaching them, but the way you're coaching them, and the way I think once you get in that professional environment or the upper ends of, I guess, semi-pro, it becomes a lot more collaborative because the experiences that the players have on the field that you actually, as a coach, you need them to bring back so that you can understand why they're making the decisions on the field. And that, I think the way we've coached over the last 10 years has changed because we've started to really understand how important it is to take the players on the journey. So to give them involvement, allow them to collaborate, and it becomes a partnership rather than the coach telling and the player doing. So with that, I think if you walked on a training field in 2021 versus, let's say, 2005, and Mike, again, as a coach, you'll have more experience than I do in this, given and Olivier, the time that you guys have been coaching. But when I walk onto a training field now, I see lots of games being played. Or controlled games or situational games versus in 2005, I remember being a player, the first 35, 40 minutes of training was drills, skill-based drills, and your last 10% of training was probably something to do with the game. I think that's starting to flip reverse because we understand that we have to train like we play to be able to get the results that Mike's talking about.
And on that, I think adding to that really is that as coaches now, we really need to be thinking about developing our leadership skills and thinking about being transformational leaders whereby we are role models. We are really working on our interpersonal skills and how we interact with players to get the absolute best out of them, because it's our responsibility as coaches at the end of the day to create that positive environment. And we only create that positive environment by developing autonomous players, by developing good decision makers on the pitch. But it's got to be fostered in that really, not fake positivity, but a really safe environment where they feel like they can take risks, they can make decisions, but it comes from a good place because you've offered that in training, you've offered that tempo, you've offered that pressure in training that are able to then recreate that in the game, so that your job is done on game day, that you're just there to watch them enact what they feel safe enough to do. Whereas, as Neil said previously, it was all about the coach telling you exactly what to do and when. And I think we've moved on from that. And I think we as coaches have got a responsibility to develop our leadership skills in different ways. It's not transactional anymore.
Absolutely.
Another thing I'd like to add to what Nic and Neil are saying is I like to think of rugby as it's a language, and so you have to meet your athletes where their fluency is, and which means that you have to have a common language and they have to understand the language of rugby, which also means that you need to equip them with the ability to understand the narrative that's happening on the field. And that's something that's been new to me this year in terms of thinking. So you can upscale decision making if you're getting them to look at pictures that are happening in the narrative in the picture, because it allows you to collaborate and speak a common language. And if you're speaking the common language, you're going to come to an understanding much faster than being really directive and saying, okay, A is going to happen, you're going to get to B, and then C is going to happen. Because in a game, there are only so many things that we can, as players and coaches, have control over. But understanding how narratives happen and being able to speak a common language allows players not only to be successful in skill execution, but it upscales their game understanding, which ultimately, I think, creates positive performance.
I'm totally agree with all the presentation, the discussion, and I think on this today everybody understand that you need to have really leader on the pitch, and this leader is the best way you could have as coach if you have 15 leader on the pitch, but we know it is not the case all the time, and we try to work a lot on this side. I have one of my thesis students currently developing a decision-making tool. We're using a virtual rugby movie, and it puts the players in situation where you are like if you are in the game and you have the situation and you have immediately to choose the good choice in relation with the situation. If you do it without pressure, without emotion, you have good results. Immediately, when you put emotion, pressure on the players, it totally changes. And this is I think is very interesting to look at what basketball work a lot to say the money time, the last minute you have to do to win again, and to try to find situation where the player are in this very pressure making decision situation. And this is so interesting in I think not only in rugby, but in team sport, to see how we could develop this quality of our players today and give them really maybe spend more time with them around the strategy and tactics, and to see how you'd never have a game running like you want, or every game is different. So it's really, really good to have a lot of situation, and the quality of virtual 3D tool is that you don't spend energy to do it. You don't need to have all team for make leader working, and this is, I think, is more and more interesting.
I think, Christine, just before you move on that, what Olivier was saying there, there's two distinct things, and Nic touched on it. Was one is thinking correctly under pressure. The thing that Clive Woodward used, the teacup, thinking correctly under pressure, which is you've got the football in your hands and you've got to make a decision. Do you kick? Do you run? Do you pass? Do you go to the line? All them things. You are executing that play and that decision making. But the one, and I think Nic touched on it with the environment she's creating, is, and you touched on it there, Olivia, is the tactic side of it. When the ball's not in play, when you've not got hold of the ball, can you teacup them, which is thinking clearly under pressure, meaning which way is the game going here? You know, what is the referee doing? You know, what's the opposition doing? What do we need to do to change our tactics? And the environment that Nic probably sets up is one that creates that thinking during training, that clear thinking during training. He's not actually on the ball. You're not actually making a decision at the line or whatever, but you're thinking of what's happening during the game. So you're going to have a real influence on how to adapt. And if you create an environment at training where the players are understanding how to do that, then they can change during the game.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Sometimes you ask the players in the money time to quickly short question to tell him, what is the score? Give me the score. And players don't know the score. The play is the end of the game. We are clearly in situation to have bonus or to win, but because they are totally in action, because emotion is full on them, and to take like how many times we have, what score, who player is injured in the opponent, lot of small things like this, but it's totally tactics, and I think it's more and more important and interesting in the decision making, but also in the training of the leader on the pitch.
I think this leads nicely into the next question, because it was picking up on a lot of these points. It was around the idea of how does performance transfer from the training pitch onto the competition field, I suppose you would call it. And we have talked about the pressure that people are under, and it is a lot easier for people to make these decisions under training conditions than it is in competition conditions, unless the coach can do something to simulate these types of pressure situations. And I think that's what we're getting at. Neil was right when he is saying that the game practice session now tend to be more game-based. There's always going to be a place for fundamental skills. However, in my view, I think they should be practiced in simulated situations rather than skills and drills. But I'm interested to hear your points or your thoughts on those points.
Christine, I think it's really interesting that you speak about pressure there, and Olivier, yourself as well. And Luke, it doesn't matter what we do at any level of the game, but players put pressure on themselves to perform. They're playing a game with teammates against an opposition that, look, ultimately, and I could have a discussion all day on the approach from under 12s and then what happens above 12, but certainly above that 12, we should be teaching our kids to play and enjoy, but also understand that there is an element of winning in there, because it reflects life. So I think if we look at the pressure that creates, and as soon as you start talking about winning, there is a pressure, but again, trying to create that positive pressure, and that pressure in training around realistic situations. And look, I just keep coming back to we need to train like we play, and we can't do that physically because of the game that we play. And now we've obviously got the regulation there that around the 20 minutes. So, although I've got no idea how on earth they're ever going to police that on a global scale, but it comes back to situations, speed, intensity, mindset. It's looking for different ways to apply pressure. Look, I was on the training field in Jersey in 2018, and we knew the weather was going to be horrendous for the next 3 weeks. So we had a bucket of water beside the field in sunshine, and we're dipping the ball in a bucket of water every 2 minutes or every minute, just trying to listen, this is what it's going to be like next weekend. So we're going to try and recreate that for you here, so that you have you create that feeling of comfort being uncomfortable. It's the old cliche around that. It's how do we create comfort when players are uncomfortable, so they've got the confidence to see a picture and react in a positive way to the picture.
I also think it's the games that you design and the rules you set around the games you design. So really simply thinking about risk and reward. If I really want to see something, I'll reward that hugely. And I'm like, right, you've got a 40-meter kick now that you've got all the way down there. If I see a huge risk that I absolutely don't want to see, I'll brutalize them and say, right, you're back on your own try line now. And you're creating that risk and reward, or you're doing situational coaching me, right? You're 20 points down now. You've only got 10 minutes to fix this. What are you going to do? So that you're really encouraging that super attack you want, or defense, etc. So creating game scenarios that encourage risk and reward, really, and will send really deep messages so that they will play to that.
So we're really talking about coaches developing thinking players then, is that right?
Right.
I think when you're creating those situations around risk and reward, or setting things up so that they're playing under pressure that simulates what happens in a game, that I think it's important that we do two things. Is that when you talk about creating thinking players, you want players that are adaptive in their thinking. So I think it's also important that when we are creating those structures and games, that we leave an element for creativity. Because I think that, I know for myself in the collegiate game, that with crossover athletes, we often get players who do bring things from other sports experience that help upscale their success on the field. And one of the things I've really tried not to do is coach that creativity out of them within the context of what we're trying to do. And I think that, you know, you can create games and focus on, use your skill work where maybe you have two outcomes and you immediately go into a game so that you're upscaling the learning. Like, this skill is getting after this overall game outcome. Now I'm under pressure, so I'm understanding what we're working on. But so I also have it set up where we have this structure, and when your reward is, if you get to it, you get to play free. So my team has to typically like offload. So when they line break, they go into an offload game. So when we're playing our games in practice, like, there'll be structure, but when the attack has success, they get to play like free form. So I think that's also like an important part of like player development around success, is getting them to be thinking but adaptive in their thinking, because the game and the environment and the picture in front of you does change. And sometimes we can't simulate everything that potentially could happen as a reaction to what a player does with the ball in hand and the reaction that's happening with the players that are playing away from the ball.
Okay. Olivier, were you wanting to come in there?
No, nothing. I think nothing more on the side, but it's sure that what we try to do is to develop skill of our players, but not to more in a situation where we ask them to see how everybody understands the situation and how everybody how to say that have a projection on what we want to do and how we want to do it. Because what is I think what is terrible when you are coach is that you could have your own image of what you want to do, how you want to do it. But most of the time, the players, maybe because we have different culture, different education or something else, don't have the same vision of what he have to do. So I think during the education of the players, the most difficult is to be sure that when we see something, we see the same thing, and we have the same idea of what kind of projection we can do to have a positive result. And it takes time to understand this. It really takes time, because when you are coach, you need to be clear in your head, and maybe to be too much clear is not a quality, but it could be a problem to sharing your vision with the players.
Yeah, and it's that idea of the shared vision that everyone buys into is so important, I think, especially in a team game like rugby.
And is more and more true with the totally different cultures you could have in a professional group. This we try to do a job with the coach, with the French coach, to make to ask players from different culture to how they manage the same situation, and to see, for example, when for you the confidence start with your coach in this kind of situation. And for example, between South African players and island players is totally different. Really, they have no. It's incredible of just find the key to try to speak about tactics or strategy, to first have enough confidence to speak about this subject, and to build after a skill process. No, I don't know, but Mike, with Toulon, you have the case of totally different culture in the same club, even with the president.
Yeah, I've coached a few teams in my career, and certainly that was up there for being different on a global array of stars with different languages, different philosophies and ideas of how the game should be played, and an owner who didn't care too much about preparation or coaching. To be a fact, he didn't really rate coaches. So it was a difficult environment. It was a very, very difficult environment. When Toulon, I think, had the best period in in the history when they won 3 European Cups, it was led by players. Probably giving Johnny Wilkinson and Gitto and Heymans and Bakis Borka were the 4, I think, who ran the team. Yeah. So, and that's, I mean, we've all talked and touched on here about all the way through the day about player first, player led organisations, empowerment. Ultimately, if you get that right, regardless of the environment, sometimes if you get that right, you've got star players like the Toulon did, they can create a wave, can't they? So the empowerment of players, letting them lead, how do you create that? But it was nothing to do with the environment at Toulon. It was just to do with individual players who grabbed hold of each other and pulled it together.
I think, Mike, I think that's massive. And look, we've spoken a lot about the way we train and pressure and the environments we create. And I think the off-field piece is the bit you're touching on there. And Chris touched on it earlier around your culture and how do you bring your culture together when you've got people from different cultures. And I think the secret sauce lies there and how you connect people and bring them together. And you talk about individual decision making and how do we create situations so they can make better decisions, but how do we connect them so that as people off field, as a group, so that they make better decisions together on field and they make decisions for each other and for the good of the team in different situations. And again, that's the situations on and off field. So that, for me, that is the secret sauce, is how do you bring a group of people together and get them to work as a team and care enough about each other to perform at their best for each other. I still think that's a really important part of the whole thing.
I've got a related question in the chat box from Jay Miles, and he's asking, how do you feel team culture plays into the efficiency of coaching and creating accurate messaging to the players?
Yeah, Christine, I just think that's huge. You know, the culture is massively important. The number one recipe for me as a coach would be honesty. There's quite a few other words you might want to use as well, but honesty being the number one, where we can have the coach, the player, can have tough conversations. As long as we're doing it for the right reasons, as Neil just said, so that we can all get better and we can all help the organisation win. But as a coach, if you are, I won't say dishonest, but if you are, when you're doing selection, for example, and you are making it up a little bit while you're dropping someone, you soon get found out. You've got to look the player in his eyes and say, this is the reason. You're not selected today because of your right shoulder tackle's not good enough. But then, you know, be a coach who then gives him a program and helps him and supports him to make his right shoulder tackle better, and give him every opportunity to the week after to try and get back into the team. And I think if you're honest like that, then you won't get found out as a coach, and the players, although they won't like the news, nobody ever likes the news of not playing and being dropped. They appreciate it in the long run. So the culture for me, in terms of messaging to the players, is everything.
On that messaging piece, I think sometimes I'm Welsh, so I like to talk. And actually, I realised as I've coached longer and longer, it's actually the clarity of your message and the clarity of your vision. So depending on what level you're coaching at, you're thinking about it very contextually, but it's that clarity of vision. Is 15 people on the pitch with exactly the same vision, so that they're working towards the exact same thing. And I don't like the idea of buying into something. That's something that you're external and you're coming into. I don't like that. I really like the idea of it being a real two-way process, it being you know, from a ground up process. And I think I've learned that clarity actually really really supports a really positive culture, because everybody knows what the job is. They know what their roles are. They know what their responsibilities are. They know if they've got a line out on the 22 here, this is what we're all doing. And they've all not bought into it, but they all really understand it. And I think that helps in terms of culture. And I think that piece around knowing different players from different places, I think you really have to take time to get to know your players. This summer, I coached Fijian players, and they wanted completely different way of being coached from the English players. But actually, we had to make that work, and that collaboration needed to happen from all of them. And so had to tease out that engagement rather than what they wanted and what they felt comfortable was just being told. And actually, there's always friction in change, isn't there? There's friction when we change to a different way of doing something. So it's working through that friction with really honest conversations about this, this is what I want from you. And, these are my clear expectations. So yeah, clarity would be my element. And there's a question there about refereeing. I think when you're at the elite end of the game, you can do analysis on a ref and see what their tendencies are, how long they'll take to penalise, what do they penalise more for, so you can really get to know that. And I think that's where at the elite end of the game, you can manipulate the game towards your advantage. But when you're working in the community game, I would always say it's like the Game of Thrones, may the game always be in your favour. And the game's always in your favour if you, as a coach, you're working with the referee, you're saying, I noticed you penalised us at this point. What is it you want my players to sort out? And you can do that in just a minute at half time, or you can get to know your referees from your society. After the game, I noticed we got quite a lot of pings there for this, and this. So actually it's building relationships, and quite often referees are really keen for that learning to happen. I've had referees from the Referee Society come in and referee 20 minutes or 30 minutes of training and say, your players are mainly going off your feet here, here and here, or, so it's working with rather than, referees are vital to our game. So may the game always be in your favour.
I like that saying.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Just about culture. If you want to have to feel the power of culture, please go to coach in Japan.
Yes.
After just 1 month, you will understand how culture is incredible. In Japan, all you try to do in France is totally improductive. You can do, you try all your time in France to make a team, to have very, very, very strong human relationship between the players. In Japan, it's so strong and it's a problem. It's incredible, but solidarity in a Japan team is a problem because they are so on this side of solidarity that they have no place to take initiative. So it's crazy for a coach. I spent, after 3 months in Japan, I say to my wife, we have to go back, I will become crazy. And I think it's a moment I understand that the problem was not the players, the problem was me. I was not in relation with the Japan culture. So after, all was wonderful. But during 3 months, I think I will become crazy because nothing run. It was incredible in kind of relation I could have, because the culture was, we can say, the opposition of France, or I don't know, but it was a wonderful experience to understand how culture is the beginning of the management and of the coaching. Good experience. So.
Okay. Moving on to a slightly different topic, although I think we've been alluding to it throughout our discussion. What does excellence look like for you in rugby coaching? Nobody's going for it.
I'll go for it.
Yeah, go for it, Nick.
I think excellence in rugby coaching, it is a real deep pedagogical content knowledge, is deep understanding of the technique and tactics of the game, and actually being able to be innovative with that. So, you know, when the hand changes on the body position on the front row, and where you actually binding on, and being willing to take those risks to tweak and change, to do something completely different. But I also think that excellence comes from authenticity and actually being yourself, and not trying to fit in any kind of mold, but actually, you know, being authentic to yourself and authentic to your players, I think it is excellence. And when you do that, and you add in that kind of really deep technical, tactical knowledge with being your authentic self, I think that's when you start to experience excellence. Let me know if any of you ever experience it.
I mean, I'll come from a different angle. I think excellence as a coach is actually be able to coach on the run. We can all sit down in a classroom and review or preview stuff and talk to the player when we sat down, but can we see it live in the moment, to give the players, not to necessarily tell them, but to give them cues that this is what you need to concentrate on, or this is happening, or ask them the question in the moment where training doesn't stop. We at Leicester was very big during last year of training time, and you know, when we analysed our training time at the beginning, it was 50% was chatting and 50% was training. So we're actually losing, you know, 50% of training. So can we coach live on the run and have this language that Farrah talked about, this rugby language that the players understood, maybe one word here or two syllable words there, that we can see it and give them pointers. Yeah, sometimes you tell, but sometimes you ask, and hopefully that during the course of the training session, you at times could just look at the player and he'll just go, yeah, I could have done this better, or yeah, that option was on, or whatever. So the excellence of a coach for me moving forward would be how good can we coach when it's live.
I'd jump in there and sort of back up what Mike's saying is seeing coaching at 1,000 different levels in the last 10 years. I think I agree, in coaching excellence is the ability to coach without impacting speed, tempo, quality and intensity of training. So it's finding those coachable moments and how you coach them without impacting that. Whereas you go in and you see a young coach that or even, let's say, a parent coach who's come into the game with a group of kids, and they're looking at it going, right, well, I don't actually have the basis of the what that you're talking about, Nick. So they slow everything down and it becomes, right, whistle, everyone come in, and they find a coachable moment that way. And you end up with 50% inactivity and 50% activity. Sometimes it's even greater than that. It's 80% inactivity and 20% activity. So I completely agree with what you're saying, Mike, and I think that's the art of coaching, and that's becoming the best coaches in the world. They're absolutely brilliant at that. They just find that moment, bang, and it's question or tell, like you're saying, get the training's still flowing. It's still flowing. But Nick, it was really interesting what you said there around the authenticity piece. So there's a little bit in there for me around excellence as being yourself. And look, I probably had a steep learning curve with that myself over the last sort of 4 or 5 years, and thinking that I needed to fit to an organisation and a head coach rather than just being myself. And it took me a little while to work it out, but I was a much more confident coach when I can be myself and look back what I do, trust what I do, have that clarity, have the confidence. And look, the last thing I'd like to leave you with there is, I think if I dip into coach education and development just now globally, I think there's an obsession with the pedagogy side of things. And I think it's really important that we get the why you coach and the how you coach right. But I think it's underpinned by the what, guys. And this is where the innovation and creative comes from. So, right, what are we going to coach? Or what are we going to do? And why are we going to do it? Does it fit with our group? Yes, it does fit with the group. So how are we going to coach that? So I think the deep understanding of what you want to do, the way you want to play and the way you want to coach it, that supports the why and the why and the how as well. And I'd like to see particularly in Australia. I'm going into a national coach development meeting today and workshop where I'm going to challenge everyone to think about the what a little bit more, and look, what are we coaching, the way we play the game. Again, we can talk about innovation and creation. I think the game's become a copy and paste. I think everyone's copy and pasting what the Kiwis do and trying to catch up with them, and then rather than looking at the what and trying to be creative and how it works for us and wherever you are in the world and the people you're coaching. So that was a long-winded response, but it was a sort of an amalgamation of everything you're saying there.
Farah, have you anything to add? I'm conscious that I can't see you, so I'm not sure if you're sticking up your hand or doing anything there.
Oh no, I'm here. Everyone has said some really good things. I think, like, my summary of how I would take it is that excellence in coaching for me is having clarity in your language. I think Neil is spot on with knowing your why and how around your coaching. I think it's also being adaptive in how you approach coaching and your thinking, and understanding your players so that you can meet them where they're at. And I think also being willing to be uncomfortable and recognize that your players can often bring things to you that can upscale your coaching that you may not have thought about, because where we come to the game as coaches, sometimes our vision of the game is very different from our players because we're not in that thick of the moment, like in the dynamic environment. Often we haven't been on field playing for a long time, and so our vision is different. So I like to have a lot of conversations with my athletes to challenge what we're doing on field and my thinking around the game, and oftentimes I find little nuggets that help me think about the game better to improve what our team is doing collectively on field.